Hi, I'm Elaine. Welcome to my podcast channel.
Do you think that math needs some genius level, like some intelligence or genius to become really successful?
Oh, no. I mean, there are certainly genius level people that make great strides in math and accomplish a lot more than I could ever in my life in a year or whatever. Um, but certainly that's not necessary, right? Uh, like my contributions to math have been quite small so far, but I still feel like they're pretty significant. Any step forward is a good one. And I don't know, any person who's willing to, again, put in work can make a step forward. Like, it may not be the solution to some big famous conjecture like the Riemann hypothesis or something, but a step is a step. And once you've written that paper and put it up on the internet, it's there for the world to see. And that step has always been taken now, and you were the one who took it. So I would say that it's anybody can do that.
For sure.
But it just takes time, and a lot of time and a lot of learning and a lot of thinking and a lot of failure.
Mm-hmm. Another key step is actually concentration as well, because as you mentioned, you spend 90% of your time on math. Is it tedious because there's so many other variables and factors in life, and then you spend 90% of your time on math? Do you feel
okay? Yeah, so I should explain that. Yeah, that's not even that's not standard for mathematicians. I would say it just happens that so I have my quote unquote job as a student, doing research. Okay, so I have my job as a student, being a teacher also, but the part that's doing research, I'm working on this very specific area, preparing to write my thesis, and trying to solve these specific problems. But the reason I said 90% of my time I'm doing math is because it just happens, and this is not necessary for anybody, that my hobby in my free time, my main one, is reading math papers
books?
And textbooks. So it's been like that since high school.
That's great. Yeah,
which is great. It makes it way easier for me to if I've read about a topic and then go on to take the class, I've already done this aspect I've mentioned of struggling with the problems, and therefore I'm able to learn a lot faster. Whereas if I have classes where I haven't done that, I struggle a lot. But it's definitely not something that everybody does. And I wouldn't even say that it helps me do my research particularly, because the stuff I'm reading about is not really related to my research. I have a lot of math interests, and as far as research interests, they're a lot more specific.
Mm-hmm. So you mentioned that you spend a lot of time on math, and I totally get how passionate you are. And then I also read some math books at times. So there are people, or high school students or grads or people who are so mathematically devoted, and there's actually a problem with focusing so much on one thing, and then they just don't have that happiness, or there's so many other variables in life and they just don't feel that happy anymore. So do you have any extracurriculars or your hobbies that supplements your love for math? Do you do other things?
Do I do other things? Good question. I mean, I already feel like the reading the math is separate from what I do as a researcher.
Really?
So I already count that as something. No, I do like hanging out with people and talking to people. I do I go for runs. There's kind of a meme among the math community that everybody's hobby is hiking. I also like going on hikes. I suppose this is because hiking is when you purposely go outside just to walk, and mathematicians spend so much time inside that this is actually a good thing to do. I actually prefer going on runs, just because it's easier. I mean, if I'm just walking around, then the immediate vicinity of where I currently am is not always that interesting. But running around, it makes it a little bit more interesting, just because it's more effort. But I do like to walk, go on hikes in scenic areas. I love reading books. I mentioned regular books too, not just math books. And I really enjoy fantasy and sci-fi.
Yeah.
And I like watching TV shows.
Yeah.
I don't know. I feel like standard hobbies everybody has. And I've also gotten really interested in like Rubik's cubes over the summer. I know that's like kind of stereotypical, but I guess I did get this. I got into this from a friend of mine who's also a math PhD student. So I guess that explains why it's stereotypical. It's kind of like a contagion passing through the math departments. So I have been, trying to improve my time on the Rubik's cube over the past couple months. So, I just know that this is like a very stereotypical math thing. I don't know how popular it is in our math department, particularly. I just know a couple of people who do it. But that's how I got into it, was from them. So I suspect that the reason, the reason that this is like more prevalent among the math community is because it's more prevalent among the math community. So everybody keeps, doing it. I don't actually do any math while I'm doing it, so I don't really feel like there's much of a connection there. Although there is some math associated with the Rubik's Cube, I just don't think about it.
Yeah, for sure. So do you think that combining extracurriculars and then other things instead of being so focused on just math itself for the rest of your life is actually important to discovering new concepts and ideas in math?
Yeah, so I know there are people who like make great discoveries while going on hikes, for instance. Personally, I can't really think while I'm walking, so I don't have that specific experience. I gotta say I don't have any good examples of like actually receiving inspiration or assistance on my research by having extracurricular activities. But as you mentioned earlier, it is important for preventing burnout that you're not always having your mind do one thing, because it is like a real like physical condition that happens. Related to like dopamine. So you do want to make sure you're doing different things throughout the course of your day. But I gotta say, I don't think that specifically my specific extracurricular activities have led to any sort of like math advancements. I don't know. Maybe that's more common for other people.
I mean, in your mathematical career and studying for, I don't know, probably for your whole life since we start math in grade 1, were there any ups and downs that you like? There's always success, and then there's always like how you just can't solve the problem, and what were the downhill moments of your math studies?
Okay, good question. Let's see. So I got to say, it's it's pretty much a bummer when you think you solved a problem and it turns out that you haven't. And this happens to me all the time. So I'm like notoriously bad at coming up with counterexamples to things. So I'll like, I'll make a conjecture, come up with what I think is true. And, I'll show this to my collaborator, and they'll be like, okay, here's like an obvious example where this just completely fails. And I'm like, oh yeah, that's a good point. But probably I've already worked really hard at trying to prove my conjecture at this point. So it's like a lot of wasted effort. And so that's annoying when it happens. It's especially annoying if you think you have a proof and then, you go back the next day and it doesn't actually make sense. That sort of thing is kind of annoying. I don't know. It's sometimes when that sort of thing happens, I like take a break and go do something else for like months.
Oh, wow.
And yeah, it's like, if you think you've made serious progress and then it turns out that you haven't, it's kind of a bummer. Luckily, I have several projects at this point, so I can just switch between them if something like that happens, or if I hit a roadblock.
So do you have any tips since you mentioned that you're not good at coming up with counterexamples, do you have any tips for maybe just how do you solve this problem yourself?
Well, usually if I have been having a hard time proving something to the point where I am like not even sure it's actually true, I'll like program it in the computer and have it check, to see if this is actually reasonable. And so, sometimes I never found a counterexample, and so I keep trying to prove it, and then eventually I do. Sometimes I find one right away. Yeah. Sometimes I don't find counterexamples, but they actually are counterexamples. They're just too big for the computer to find. Those are annoying.
Yeah.
That's the worst possible outcome.
So do you show your proofs or theorems or conjectures to your friends, and then they might tell you they're like different people have different thoughts, and then they just tell you about their personal counterexamples, and then would that give you some inspiration?
The thing that I do find helpful is that like sometimes I'll just talk to my partner who doesn't do math at all, and I'll ask her, like, just like in very general terms, I'll tell her what I'm doing, and then like she'll just ask this like great question, even though she has no idea like of the specifics of what I'm talking about, and then I'll be like, oh, I never thought of that, and then I'll go and think about it, and it's actually like super important. So I do get benefits from like not giving people my specific problem and just kind of vaguely describing what I'm doing.
Yeah. Oh, that actually is a very good suggestion. Maybe just talking to people and kind of vaguely describing it. Maybe just let them ask you questions, and then, do you really know about this stuff? And then,
yeah, just explaining what you're doing is honestly, I find that very helpful. Like, if you could put into words exactly what you're thinking about, then a lot of times that just like the thought process behind doing that is different from what you're doing solving problems, so you might see something new. I've had that happen like a couple of times.
Since you mentioned that you read a lot of math books, what's one of your recommendations from your piles of math books?
Yeah, so I mean, my favorite is probably not accessible to high schoolers, unfortunately, but my favorite is called a first course on modular forms. So this was the introduction to modular forms that got me interested in it back when I was applying to that RU, actually like a year before that. And the thing that was really nice about that book, which I think the only background is like a set theory course, like an intro to proofs course. So once you get to that point in like a math career, then you can read it. But the thing that was really nice about that was that it gave an introduction to like well, first of all, it had like a big motivating problem, which is to understand modular forms. And it like did all this random math, like manifolds and complex analysis and all these sorts of like different areas of math. And it like did it all from scratch, right? So I didn't need to have taken those classes to do this. And it started using the theorems from those classes to solve its main problem. So like by like reading this book, I was able to like get interested in all these classes and kind of have motivating problems from them already before, like 2 years before I took them in most of the cases. I just found, that book, I really enjoyed.
Yeah, that's great. Do you take a lot of notes? Like,
no, I don't ever take notes, I would say. Some people, when they're reading a math book, will like take notes on everything, do all the exercises, work out the theorems themselves. This is definitely the best way to actually learn everything that's in there.
Yeah.
Again, I just do this as a hobby.
Oh, okay. So you just read over stuff and then turn over the pages and then read through.
I just read it like a novel.
Oh, that's great. So do you think if you read it like a novel, do you remember everything that well? Or you just read it?
Yeah, so I remember it in the way that you would remember the plot of a novel, which is like, you remember the narrative. You don't necessarily remember all the details, but you remember the story, like the conflict and the resolution, and the characters. So I don't know. I think it gets stored in the same part of my brain as like, the plot lines of books.
Oh, that's awesome hearing how you connect math books, which is for a lot of people very tedious, and then you connect it to a novel, then it's great.